Good morning, everybody. My name's Paul Welborn, and this is Faith Baptist Church Sunday School. Around 18 degrees this morning. A little bit of coffee with snow on the bottom of the cup. So welcome, and we are going to be looking at Joseph in the Bible. Joseph, we've actually been studying Joseph just recently at Faith Baptist Church. Our pastor, Mickey, has been talking about Joseph and his family and some of the dysfunctional sides of things, but we're going to be looking at it piece by piece in Sunday school as almost like a recap to the messages that were at the church several months ago. It's always kind of good to review because sometimes you hear things at church and then you think, okay, what did the pastor say or what was discussed? And so, again, repetition is key, but we're going to be looking at Joseph. Joseph is one of my favorite characters in the Bible. My son's name is Joseph. Dual name. My grandfather's name was Joseph, and also the biblical character Joseph has been something that's been impressed upon me. I've always just loved so through the years. So anyway, the text we're going to be looking at is Genesis 37, and many of you know the story of Joseph anyway, but sometimes in life you're just caught off guard. And back in December, you may remember that was some situations like that. And you've had times in your life when you've been caught off guard, kind of like what happened with Joseph, where it's almost like a sabotage. And you think, I didn't see that coming. Better.com, a company that had around, I think it was around 10,000 employees or so anyway. Back in December, they had Zoom meetings with their employees. And basically, I mean, if you're like me, you're used to Zoom meetings. You're watching this online. I have Zoom meetings all the time for work. So they thought it was just going to be another day of Zoom meetings. 900 employees found out that day that their jobs were ending and that they were being let go and they were fired by Zoom. You may have heard that in the news because it did make the news just before Christmas. And what a bad way to tell people that they did not have jobs anymore. And so anyway, I just saw actually this week they were talking about the CEO of that company. They were trying to regroup and they might be hiring some people back. But still, there's been times in your life, and I know of pastors and churches and people in Christian leadership positions that have had basically the deacons turn on them or the church or that sort of thing, the church people. And there's been difficult times. Joseph had that time. Now, a little bit of historical context. They were living in Hebron, which is now modern day West Bank. They were in Canaan land, which was a promised land. Jacob had moved there with Rachel and Leah, and then also he would then take on 2 other wives after that. But he was there in Hebron, which today is like, again, this week in the news, just reading about the Palestinian conflict that's happening there. So it's interesting, these places we read about in the Bible are still very relevant today and are still very centermost in the news. So I don't think that's coincidence. I think God's hand has been through this throughout history. So Genesis chapter 37, verses 1 through 5. Let's look a little bit at it here. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, in the land of Canaan. These are the family records. At 17 years of age, Joseph tended sheep with his brothers. The young man was working with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah. That was the other 2 wives that Jacob took on, his father's wives. And he had brought bad report about them to his father. So he came to his dad and said, they're slacking, they're not working. If you've ever been in a leadership position at work, you might have that happen to you where people come to you and say, so-and-so is not doing a good job, and then you have to decide on how to handle it. And so now Israel, and that was the other name for Jacob, Israel loved Joseph more than his other sons because Joseph was a son born to him in his old age, and he made a robe of many colors, or some theologians also think not only was this robe of many colors, but it was also long-sleeved, which back in those days, it meant something. It meant that it took extra work. When his brothers saw this, that their father loved him more than all the other brothers, they hated him and could not bring themselves to speak peaceably to him. Then Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. So prior to Bilhah and Zilpah, he had Rachel and Leah, Jacob did, as his wives. Jacob also known as Israel. Hopefully you're not thoroughly confused. But if you know the story of Jacob, he had pursued Rachel. She was beautiful. And whenever he had worked at Rachel's father's farm, Rachel's father said, well, here's my other daughter, Leah. And so Leah was older, less attractive. somebody that Jacob really did not desire. And so he had to work 7 more years for Rachel's hand in marriage from her father to be blessed, that sort of thing. So basically, anything that happened that Leah did, it was always like, huh, wah, wah. Whereas Rachel, it was like, okay, honey, yeah, what would you like? So that was the family dynamic. And then you had some other people thrown in there, some other wives, which, again, you think about the confusion and birthdays and trying to remember anniversaries and those sort of things. It just, can you imagine? Good job, Jacob. So anyway, Rachel had 2 kids, Joseph, and then a younger son, Benjamin. And you don't hear Benjamin mentioned much. He must have been really little, because later on you hear about Benjamin. But at this point, he had given Jacob this robe and had it made. It was special. And Joseph wasn't really trying to say, you know what, I want this special robe made for me so I can be set apart and be known as somebody special. No, it was given to him, and it was expected that he wear it. It's almost like a Christmas Story whenever the pink bunny outfit's made for Ralphie, and it's expected he wear it anytime that his aunt's in town, you know. But anyway, it was that similar setup, and so he wore it. And not only did he wear it, but Joseph must have been kind of naive, because he told them about certain dreams he had had, and the dreams basically were that the stars bowed down, and dreams that really portrayed that the brothers would at some point bow down to Joseph, and they were prophetic. But again, timing, and when you mention something to somebody, you don't just, if you kind of have picked up on that they don't really like you, you don't tell those same people, hey, one day, you don't like me now, but one day you're going to bow down to me, especially if you're 17 years old and they're much bigger and stronger and that sort of thing. And you know, so again, the family dynamic with Joseph and his brothers, there's some tension. So let's continue to look on. And again, you guys know this. It's a classic story in the Bible, but still. Genesis 37, verses 19 through 24. And then they said to one another, oh, look, here comes that dream expert, or that dreamer, as dream expert basically is kind of how they're, if you translated it fully into modern language. So now come, let's kill him, throw him into one of the pits. And we can say a vicious animal ate him, and then we will see what becomes of his dreams. So they basically said, you know, you think we're going to bow down to you one day? Well, we'll just take things into our own hands and take care of that. And so when Reuben heard this, he tried to save him from them. Reuben is one of the ones that steps up, and he has a conscience. And he said, let's not take his life. And Reuben also said to them, do not shed his blood. Let's throw him into that pit in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him, intending to rescue him from them whenever he returned to his father. So Reuben basically had the intention of, you know, let's throw him into this pit. I'll come back and get him. When Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped off his robe, many colors that he had on, and they took him and threw him into the pit, and the pit was empty without water. It was basically a cistern, and you're thinking, what's a cistern? But it's almost like a well, like a dry well. When I was a kid, I used to like exploring old houses, abandoned houses. I'm fascinated with it. Dad used to warn me, son, anytime you're around an old abandoned house, be aware that there might be an old well, because back then, that's how people got their water. And sure enough, through the woods over here, not too far, when I was a teenager, I went hiking with some of my friends. We went around the house, and I remembered what Dad had said, and I told one of them, I said, look, we saw some sheet metal on the ground, and we could tell that maybe there were some stones around it, and we lifted up the sheet metal, and there was an old rudimentary well. We looked down in it, and it went straight down, and there was no water in it. And I thought about this passage in the Bible. I'm like, gosh, you know, you used to hear about stories of kids falling into wells and pits and things like that, not being able to get out. And that's what happened with Joseph. He was thrown into that. And so then, it's windy, by the way, shaking the camera. 18 degrees, wind chill of 9 degrees. But anyway, it's cold. Let's continue on. So Genesis 37, verses 26 through 27. And Judah said to his brothers, what do we gain if we kill our brothers and cover up his blood? Come on, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay a hand on him, for he is our brother in our own flesh. And his brothers agreed. So you had a couple of folks step up and say, let's not kill him. One was thinking, okay, let's just throw him into this pit. Later on, we can come back and, you know, I can rescue him. The other was thinking, well, let's make money off of him. Let's go ahead and tell Dad that he died, but let's sell him to somebody, and he will be carried off far away, and we'll never hear from him again. His dreams will never come true. Meanwhile, Joseph this whole time was confused. He was scared. He was 17 years old. My son Joseph is 17. I think about that. A senior in high school. And he was basically helpless in the bottom of this pit. He could probably hear some of the discussion that was happening. If you've been in that situation where you feel like I'm in the bottom of a pit, I'm helpless, I know what's happening, and I know that everything that's happening right now is basically against me, remember that God had a plan for Joseph. He still has a plan for you. So hold on to that. Remember God's promises. Look back in the Bible and think about how God rescued his people. And now ultimately, even if we don't have rescue from this life, that we know we have the eternal hope of heaven, of those who trust in Christ as their Savior. Join us next week and we'll look again at Genesis. Not sure if we're going to have church in person tomorrow, but we'll continue on the study of Genesis, looking at Joseph's life. Hope you have a great day. Be safe and keep warm. Thanks.